Good morning, and thank you once again for joining me for just a few moments today as we begin our Tuesday and as we look into the Word of God for a daily word of encouragement and some challenges from the Scriptures as we look at the book of James. We're going to look at James chapter number 5, and we're going to read the first 6 verses of this chapter, and we're going to speak for just a few moments on the subject of money as we think about these verses within this chapter. The Bible reads in verse number 1, "Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have reaped or heaped treasure together for the last days. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter. Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you." As we come to these verses here in James chapter number 5, we find here that James addresses the subject of money and really the corruption that money can bring within a person's life. Now, keep in mind, he is addressing those that are unbelievers. He's addressing those that have lived for money. They have gone out there and they've corrupted their lives and corrupted the lives of others by the use of their money in the wrong ways. Now, as we think about this subject of money and finances and wealth here this morning, we must first understand a few principles that the Bible teaches us concerning this subject. And first of all, we must understand that money itself is not sinful. Being wealthy is not sinful. That is never condemned within the Bible throughout the Word of God. However, the Bible does teach us here this morning that the love of money is the root of all evil. And so the spirit of greed that money might bring, the spirit of covetousness that money might bring, that is the root of all evil. And therefore, we must always be careful with the wealth and the finances that God gives us within this life. And then secondly, we must understand as we think about this subject here this morning, is that money is a wonderful tool. It's a wonderful servant within our lives, but money is a horrible master. And the Bible teaches within the Scriptures that we cannot serve two masters. We'll either serve God or we'll serve mammon, which is speaking about money. And therefore, we must remember that money is just a tool and it's something that can be used to serve the Lord for the glory of God. But God must always be our master. Money must simply be a servant within our lives. And then also, we must remember here that God is the owner of everything. The Bible teaches that every good gift and every perfect gift cometh from above. And then also in 1 Corinthians chapter number 10, the Bible teaches us that the earth and the fullness thereof are His. And so everything comes from the Lord. It all belongs to God. We're simply stewards and managers of the wealth and the money God allows us to have here in this earth. And so as we think about those few introductory principles, I want you to now notice with me in James chapter number 5, there are 3 rebukes that James gives us concerning the wrong way to manage and steward the wealth that God has given us here within this life. And first of all, in verse number 2 and verse number 3, it speaks about the spirit of being covetous. It speaks about the spirit of being greedy, and because of that spirit of covetousness, piling away or hoarding the wealth that God has given us. Now, it's not speaking against savings. It's not speaking against, planning and preparing for the future and having a retirement for our lives and laying up for not only our children, but also for our grandchildren. That's not what it's speaking against, but it's speaking against a spirit of covetousness that goes beyond all of that. And instead of using the wealth that we have for the Lord, we're simply holding on to all of our finances beyond what is necessary for us within this life. And it says there, your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten, your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. And as we think about the Bible times, wealth oftentimes was represented by the amount of grains that somebody had, or the fancy clothing that they possessed, or the precious metals that they had within their possessions. And here the Bible speaks about the fact that your grains have been corrupted. They have rotten away. It says that your garments have been moth-eaten. Your fancy clothing has been moth-eaten. Your precious metals, your gold and silver is cankered, and now it has rusted away. And it's the picture here that they've held on to that wealth for a very long time, and they're doing that out of a spirit of covetousness, and they're relying and placing their confidence upon the finances that they have within their lives. And so God is teaching us here that it's wrong for us to have a greedy spirit and hold on to all of God's resources and not surrender that to the Lord and seek the Lord's wisdom and ask, Lord, what would you have me to do with this? How do you want me to manage this? How do you want me to use this for your glory and for your honor? And so once again, nothing against savings or preparing or planning for the future, but it's speaking about that spirit that goes beyond all of that, beyond what is necessary, and simply hoarding God's wealth and resources for our own selfish desires. And then in verse number 4, it speaks about here the corruption that money can bring. And in verse 4, it says, Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. And then here in verse number 6, it says, Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you. And it's speaking about those that have taken their wealth and they have cheated their employees. They have not paid them fairly the way that they ought to. And the Bible gives a warning here that the cries of those that have been oppressed come into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Speaking about the Lord of hosts, speaking about the omnipotence of God. And then in verse number 6, it speaks about the fact that they have corrupted the powers and the authorities of their day for their gain, that they might go out there and persecute those who are just and those who are honest. And so we find here the corruption. They've used their money for their power. They've used their money to bribe those that would be in authority, and they are they are oppressing those that are just and honest in their day. And then finally in verse number 5, we find that they're using their wealth for their carnality and for their lustful pleasures. It says, Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter. And they've used their money for their indulgences, for their personal, selfish, carnal, lustful desires. And God teaches us here that that is not the right way to use the wealth that he has given us within this life. And so as we think about these 3 principles, and then as we think about these 3 condemnations that God gives us, let us take our finances and the wealth and the blessings that God has given us, and let us use it according to his will and his desire, ultimately to bring him glory and bring him honor within our lives. And so I pray this morning that that could be a blessing and an encouragement to each and every one of us. And I pray that we'd be faithful stewards of the wealth and the finances that God has so graciously given us within this life. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.